The warriors of the Aztec Empire were truly incredible, some of the best warriors of their time. Let me show you why. Welcome to Frontline, and episode 3 in our series, Train How You Fight. Throughout their history, both Central and South America have produced some very unique warfighters. They have a great track record of creating ridiculously adaptable jungle forces, fierce hand-to-hand combatants, and agile guerrilla fighters. An Aztec warrior during the height of their empire absolutely embodies all of these qualities. Today, we are going to dive into the institutions and training that made their domination of the continent possible. Hey guys, if you find this content works for you, please drop a like and comment for the algorithm. While medieval knights on horseback were making massed cavalry charges to decide the fate of Europe, the Aztecs were building a land of excess on the other side of the world, and chopping off the heads of everyone they faced in battle. For the early Aztec people to produce such a soldier, they had to first build an industry. The origin of the Aztec people is debated and somewhat uncertain. The term Aztec doesn't pertain to any particular group or tribe. Instead, it's an amalgamation of different nomadic people that entered the Valley of Mexico around 1300 AD. These groups would help form the Mexica people and its culture. A classic origin story, the Aztecs were initially farmers and hunter-gatherers. However, due to migration, they had become homeless wanderers and so were seen as unwelcome newcomers. Considered poor refugees trying to find a better life, you can imagine how they weren't too popular with the existing folks in the area. The Aztec people would have to compete for the fertile soil of the Mexico Valley they wanted to settle. Luckily, the previous Toltec Empire was on the way out, and with plenty of war in the region to go around, the Aztecs were offered their first chances to build their reputation as fierce, mercenary warriors. Finally, in 1325, after years of wandering, the Aztec people gave up looking for desirable land and decided to make it for themselves. After someone saw an eagle perched on a cactus near some marsh, they said, "Screw it, this is probably a sign to build our settlement. I don't know, I'm tired of living under trees." And so, Tenochtitlan was founded. They drained the swamps, constructed artificial islands with lush gardens, and planted everything from corn to avocados. This sophisticated agricultural system would later be crucial in enabling the Aztecs to build themselves into a successful state, and later, an empire capable of fielding large armies. Still largely considered a backwater settlement, Tenochtitlan remained inconsequential until in 1428, when their current leader, Itzcoatl, formed a three-way alliance with two neighboring groups. They defeated their most powerful rivals for influence in the region. By the 16th century, the Aztecs had come to rule over up to 500 small states and some 5 to 6 million people, either by conquest or commerce. Tenochtitlan, at its height, had more than 140,000 inhabitants and was the most densely populated city ever to exist in Mesoamerica. Crucial to understanding the driving force for its warrior society was Tenochtitlan's bustling markets, which could be visited by some 50,000 people on major days. This is largely considered the beginning of the empire and where we'll draw the majority of our sources from. While the Aztec economy depended on trade, tribute, and agriculture, the real business of the empire was war. Much like we showcased in our video on the ancient Spartans, the Aztecs too perceived warfare as one of the pillars of their society. This led many young boys to grow up in the shadow of their local heroes, and this early indoctrination was designed to feed into the stoic discipline and ideology of honor and empire before all else that would make them so fearless when the time came to spill blood. It's no mistake that training for the best historical warriors started young, and the Aztecs were no exception. As early as 5 years of age, children were assigned to perform tasks such as the intensive physical labor of carrying heavy goods and food supplies from the central marketplace. Training would start even earlier if you believe that cutting off a baby's umbilical cord and burying it on the field of battle would make them a better future warrior. By the age of 7, all Aztec boys would be expected to handle and maneuver their family boat to produce fish from Lake Texcoco, from which Tenochtitlan resided upon. As they grew, Aztec leadership formed inventive ways to keep any wayward soul in line. Sure, there were public beatings available, but for severe disobedience, why not offer a more enduring punishment, such as stinging lashes with thorn bushes, or forcing the smoke from roasted chili peppers into the face and eyes of those especially bratty kids? You know the ones. Like the Spartans, the Aztecs also would keep their warriors underfed. The paltry portions given to them would teach the children to subsist on meager rations during hardship and times of war. The young lads had to look forward to ritual feasts conducted on particular days of the month to offer a temporary respite to their hunger. It seems the way to make super soldiers is to underfeed children. Who knew? All of that delicious religion food came with a caveat, however. Festivals would often include diverse ceremonies, which often included real combat scenarios. Commonly set in a gladiatorial or melee-style exhibition, these were fought between high-ranking prisoners and Aztec warriors. Heavily trained and experienced Aztecs put their prowess on display here, but combat duels between fledgling youths or their slave counterparts also took place. As you might expect, these periods of the year came with inflicted casualties, but it also overcame the problem of facing danger and death for the first time among newcomers. Aspiring children would be cheered on by their family and friends, not to mention society's leaders, religious and otherwise. There was a great deal of pressure to perform bravely and prove yourself to the veterans of the warrior schools you wish to attend. There were two primary schools that most children attended. The House of the Lineage was the school for nobles. These candidates started as young as 7 years of age and were trained for priesthood, leadership, and warfare, while the House of the Youth was founded for the commoners who were to be dedicated warriors, but only after they reached the age of 15. After all, who's going to carry all that shit around the market? Not rich people. Regardless of their status, all boys in the Empire would receive a good education, no matter what their prospects for a career were. Astronomy, rhetoric, poetry, history, and of course religion would all be important subjects at school. To run these warrior schools, the Aztec Empire looked to their younger veterans, some barely older than the pupils themselves. This may have been a conscious choice, or it has been theorized that this alluded to the increasing demand placed on military duties for a society who required an ever-constant supply of skilled warriors. Before long, it was time for actual training on the battlefield. As students progressed, they were expected to handle menial jobs until they graduated shield bearers for the leaders. This could entail such exciting tasks as making fire and cleaning both weapons and house. While in times of active war, they would follow along to the battlefield where they would carry additional weapons and material, similar to a medieval squire. Our boy was slowly learning to become a man. There was a strong notion of interdependence that was constantly reinforced into a student-teacher fraternity. Classes were put to work on city projects and conducted group-based drills to build teamwork and foster competition, while intimidation and straight-up abuse was frequently used to build fortitude and constitution. If you're taking notes, so far we have underfeed them, use them as a cheap source of labor, and treat them like an asshole. While over in the House of the Lineage, the rich kids were being trained in a similar fashion, but with diverse disciplines which included government affairs and advanced warfare taught by the most seasoned warriors of the Empire. Completing this well-rounded and free-thinking soldier was leisure activities like singing and dancing, while spiritual nurturing was ongoing at every opportunity. This included studying the many vibrant Aztec gods, which the children could then begin looking forward to dying for once they became a warrior. As a mainstay of the army, discipline continued to be strict, with the death penalty still on the table for serious crimes. If you messed up on your way up the ladder, there'd be 100 hungry little mouse standing behind you to take your place. If a young pupil showed talent, they would begin practical military service as a spy, to be used to run dispatches, infiltrate towns, or shadow enemy movements. This would be a valuable source of experience and prestige. Veterans from both schools were to train their pupils in the art of handling weapons. They would start with distance and work their way closer to the target.
The closer you get to being a pro, the closer you can get to the client.
At the age of 17, our little boy was now a little man, and no doubt eager to start cutting ankles. For the driving force of conflict in the Aztec Empire was to produce sweet, sweet ritual captives. As a commoner, this meant you had to start out at the bottom once again and prove yourself worthy. Your initial position might be as a scout or simple grunt foot soldier. Now that you were an adult, your first capture was always on your mind, as this was an initiation into the world of the real Aztec warrior, and a surefire way to begin rising up the ranks. The more time that passed, the weaker you looked. This systemic drive gave the Aztec warriors several benefits over their rivals. First, the continuous pressure to enter battle and perform well drove their warrior society to constantly improve while breeding out the weak. Second, the culture this fostered ensured that new Aztec warriors were trained to consider their status in society as more important than their lives on the battlefield. Credit for a prisoner taken would be considered when you had subdued them alive, usually by breaking legs or cutting the tendon of the Achilles. Savage. If they could walk their ass back home with you, all the better. These poor captured souls would enter the Aztec slave markets, or when required, become sacrifices in religious ceremonies. The Aztecs may have executed hundreds, if not thousands, in non-stop ceremonies that could last days. Seen as necessary for religious and ceremonial purposes, this fed such a great demand that entire conflicts would be arranged to supply the necessary captives. Now, if you were unfortunate enough to be a subjugated territory on bad terms with your Aztec overlords, the Empire would enforce favorable terms through intimidation to fill these quotas whenever they desired. This need for fresh tribute facilitated empire expansion. The Emperor himself was known to reward successful warriors of both classes with honors such as the right to wear certain garments or colors, as well as nobility for commoners and land for nobles. Even priests had their own captive reward system when they traveled with the army and were no slouches in warfare. In theory, every Aztec warrior could, if he captured enemy warriors, advance far in society. The Eagle and Jaguar warriors were the two main military societies, and the highest rank open to commoners. You know, those guys hauling your shit around all day while you went to fancy prep school. So since access to these warrior classes was based on the captive system, it ensured only qualified and experienced soldiers advanced to the top. This avoided the problem of having unqualified rich kids lead your troops to their deaths. Please see Warfare in Europe from the 17th and 19th century for more on that. This rank-based distinction was seen in their clothes and armor. They received special battle costumes representing eagles and jaguars with feathers and pelts. The highest of these veterans could become full-time warriors and commanders in the field. Now, for commoners who reached the eagle or jaguar rank, they were awarded nobility, along with certain privileges like land, the right to drink alcohol, and wear fancy jewelry otherwise denied to normal plebs. Finally, they could be invited to dine at the palace and could keep concubines. Now, if alcohol and a harem isn't worth breaking a few legs for, I don't know what would be. After being granted participation in arena sacrifices, these warriors could quickly become local celebrities. But how many captives would it cost a skilled soldier to be inducted into these ranks? Sources will differ, but the number ranges from as few as 4 to as many as 20 captives would have to be handed over before you could wear your own jaguar. This number may have increased over time as better training and prowess pushed the bounds of possibility for each subsequent generation. Needless to say, great physical strength, battlefield bravery, and a buttload of captured enemy soldiers was necessary to obtain this rank. These Mesoamerican knights looked sharp on and off the battlefield. The difference between Eagle and Jaguar was largely aesthetic, but with each rank their status was instantly recognizable. This visual impact was used to intimidate the enemy. On the field, every feather, every banner, every decorative weapon told the enemy they were seasoned fighters through and through. Here, they could be found standing tall with weapons made of wood, obsidian, and flint. Aztec warfare began with distance weapons such as the bow or atlatl spear thrower, which most Aztecs would be familiar with from their hunting and gathering roots. It required precision, and in war would be found in the hands of a pro. The classic and timeless use of a wooden board with sharp objects sticking out was more direct and easy to master. Here they used volcanic rock called obsidian, which was ridiculously sharp. The name of this particular weapon roughly translates to hungry wood, which is just terrifying and awesome at the same time. Longer spear versions were handed to less experienced warriors who had yet to show their ability to close and capture an enemy. Don't let the others sneer at you. You'll get your hands on that first ankle in no time. From their humble beginnings in a marsh to becoming a powerhouse of the region, the Aztec economic might allowed them to field armies that possibly numbered into 6 figures. A far cry from their European contemporaries, who were at the time busy playing with plague rats. This was only possible with the unlikely hero of the Aztec Empire, their innovative agricultural advancements. Armies were then subdivided into flexible units of 8,000 men and used this abundance of avocado toast as a strategic supply while on campaign. Well-trained runners were stationed every 2.5 miles throughout the empire, quickly informing commanders in the capital of enemy troop movements from the farthest flung outpost. The Aztecs moved swiftly and with initiative to pin their enemy in place, a favorite tactic for warriors who needed to corral their prey together. Each drum, horn, and banner would signal a sophisticated maneuver to discipline troops, whose only mindset was to meet the enemy in battle so they could return home with captives, with honor. The Aztec Empire would go on to form a super entity which would rule over the Valley of Mexico and put the fear of the hungry wood into the other Mesoamerican city-states. Despite their dominance, they were almost constantly in a state of perpetual war, largely by choice. There is a debate that the Aztecs might have eventually burned themselves out in a fashion similar to the Spartans or Romans, who were also filled with an insatiable hunger to expand the riches leading back to their capital. This theory became purely speculative after the Spanish brought Hernan Cortés to the continent in 1519, where he would bring European diseases along with a lot of bad decisions. Tenochtitlan would lose 40% of its population in his first year alone. After convincing the surrounding Mexica people that they shouldn't be sacrificed anymore, Cortés, along with his modern firearms and a few cannon, mounted an offensive on the city, and in 1521 killed an estimated 240,000 people during its conquest. This marked the end of Mesoamerica's last great native civilization. Soon after his victory, Cortés razed the wonder of Tenochtitlan to the ground and built Mexico City in its place. And that's where your avocado toast comes from now. Thanks for watching.